Hi there, and welcome to Gems of Wisdom, a community formed for women who inspire the hearts, minds, and lives of others through art, charity, and community. Our guests are women in the arts who nurture creative and abundant living for all religions, communities, and forms of spirituality. I'm your host, Teresa Marone, and I'm so glad to welcome you to Gems of Wisdom today. We're sponsored by Bridget's Place, a soul sanctuary that provides education to support the spiritual transformation of women. Find them at bridgetsplace.org. My guest today is Doni M. Wilson. She's a professor of English at Houston Baptist University, and she frequently teaches in the Cameron School of Business in the MBA program at the University of St. Thomas. She received her PhD in English from UNC at Chapel Hill. Now, Doni is also a writer for the Houston Chronicle, and she was recently tasked with covering the final show of the final tour of Motley Crue right here in Houston, Texas. Doni is going to join us today to share her love of essay writing, how she got her first story published, and why she feels that writing is so important. I'm so glad to welcome her today, and I would like for you, my listeners, to welcome her as well. Doni, my first question for you is, you don't really fit into any real box, do you?
Well, not to the kind of writing that I'm doing now. I have been an English professor for over 2 decades. And I really do love teaching. I love my students. They're fantastic people to know, and I learn a lot from them. But I didn't really start writing for a wider audience until a few years ago. And the Houston Chronicle ran an essay I wrote about going to some museums with my son, and my dean at my university sent it to them behind my back. I didn't even know he had sent it, and an editor named Kiri O'Connor, who's a wonderful editor, ran it, and such an encouraging thing to think that I could do something besides academic writing. And my son is 14 now, but I'm really inspired by him. He's a really interesting kid, and so we go on a lot of adventures together, and I liked writing about that. So you don't really have to go to Tahiti necessarily to write something meaningful. Sometimes just your everyday life has a lot in it, and it's great if you can share that.
Well, I think you're right. I know I really love hearing a new take on something that, has almost even become doing it by rote. But certainly taking your son to a museum, a lot of people can relate to that. I think a lot of kids might resist going to the museum, and then they have a great time. But when you do your articles for the Chronicle, do they tell you what kind of thing they want, or do you just think, hey, this would be a great idea for a story? Let me see. Let me run that by them.
Well, I have been super lucky in that I work with an editor, Lisa Gray, who does this online department called Gray Matters, and a lot of it is in print too, but it runs every day online. And she ran my first piece last year on Halloween, and it was this piece called I Hate Halloween. and it was just like, there was so much effort going into Halloween, and I thought, oh my gosh, what are we celebrating, tooth decay? I mean, I just, so I wrote this little essay, and I've really been writing for her a lot ever since, and I've been able to do some really interesting things. I've done the Downton Abbey recaps, and I've been able to write a lot about literary figures that in print you just can't write a lengthy essay sometimes, and
no, nobody reads it.
And online you can, and so that's been a wonderful opportunity to write longer things and reach a lot of readers that you might not necessarily get to do in an academic piece of writing.
Well, I see it's kind of busting you out of your box, but you definitely fit the mold, because like I was telling the listeners earlier, you see what I mean, guys? I mean, Doni's a hoot. You're a hoot. Now, let's just kind of shift gears for a minute. I play around with a little writing myself. Nothing as lofty as what you do. I love to write marketing copy, and I love looking at somebody's business or service or even their product and coming up with a fresh way to present it. In fact, I call myself a tagline therapist.
Oh, that's great.
I just love it. I love coming up with, ways to present products and services for people who are in the self-help, personal development. It's got to mean something for me to get excited about it. I'm not going to be getting excited about alternators or, some new software program. But what I've noticed is that there's just so many ideas coming, from all different directions that, really the sky's the limit. Are you ever tempted to write a screenplay or a treatment for a TV show or a little playlet? I mean, are you kind of going into writing about fictional characters or anything like that?
Yeah, I am. I'm working on a few other projects. I just love writing, and I think that, right now memoirs are very hot. But I don't think it's so important the genre you write in. I think what's important is that you like language enough to channel it into some form. And, I love words. I mean, you just look up the history of a word, and it's a fascinating thing in and of itself. And so some of my students, they want to write a novel, but you can start with anything. You don't have to do the hardest thing first. And but I do like I've been doing some fiction and a little bit of poetry here and there, but I have to say I'm really in love with the personal essay, because I think there's an honesty about saying, look, this is my opinion, and not everyone has to agree with it, but you if you can explain to someone why you think a certain way about something, I think it's a great way to connect with people, even if they don't agree.
Oh, absolutely, especially if they don't agree, because then you've given them a little window into something different. I myself, I have to tell you, I don't think I could write fiction. I don't think that I could come up with characterizations or dialogue. I'm pretty good at, I can talk.
Well, I have to tell you, I really understand what you're saying, because I think I have ambitions for writing more fiction, but honestly, the world around me it's fascinating. I don't really have to make it up. I mean, I did the final tour of Motley Crue, and I loved writing it because I went with my brother, who's a professional musician, to two of their final performances, and I got to think about how, it was kind of the end of an era with this band who stuck together for 34 years. I mean, that's longer than a lot of things on this earth.
That's longer than 3 different marriages that I can think of.
Well, there you go. I mean, you can't, I couldn't, if I made up a story about a bad boy rock band that stayed together for 34 years, no one would believe me. So I don't have to do that. I really like taking in the interesting stuff around me and trying to figure it out. And I like writing about. I have a lot of. I'm a very fortunate person. I have a lot of interesting experiences, and I kind of like documenting them so I don't forget them, and that I can, have that in writing for my son. And so I feel very lucky being able to write these essays.
Well, I think it sounds really fascinating. And, like what you were saying is documenting things that have happened to you. And even what you were saying is, you know you're going to do this story on Motley Crue. You found the one thing that maybe everybody, or possibly what I'm saying is, the one thing that struck you is that they have this persona of being bad boys, but they're the ones who have made it 34 years.
Right.
And they're doing their final tour as friends. We're assuming that they're really feeling strongly about each other because they're getting, so many of the bands break up before that final tour.
That's right.
And so you found that one thing that you really want to focus in on. You bring your brother to see a couple of concerts to prepare. You get his expert opinion on the music side of it, and then you write your piece. So take our listeners a little bit through when you really sat down to write it, how you felt and what you really wanted to impart there.
Well, the first of the final tour concerts I went to was at the Woodlands, and my brother had gotten the tickets because he wanted me to see Tommy Lee do this thing where he spins around in a 360 playing the drums upside down, and it's very dramatic. And they didn't do that at the Woodlands. I don't think they had it set up to do that. However, we were on the last row of the seated part of the Woodlands, and so when Motley Crue walked for their final song, guess what? We turned around on the last row, and there they were walking right there, and I got to touch Tommy Lee's hand and see them do their Home Sweet Home, 30 feet away from us. So that was just this huge surprise. No one knew that would happen. And see them so up close was, way more than I bargained for. And so the minute I saw them walk by us, and Doug did a high five with Vince Neil, and I brushed Tommy Lee's hand. That whole moment was so exciting, and I'd been feeling all wistful about, how do you end something like this? It doesn't have to be being part of a rock band. How do you end anything that's lasted that long? And I thought, wow, what you do is you exit like a rock star, and that's exactly what they did. And so sometimes it's just like a phrase. Like I wanted an essay that had exit like a rock star in it. And so I knew I had to write about this. And
I just got chills when you said that.
And so sometimes I'm a very happy person when I'm out in the world doing things. I get really excited about art exhibits and rock concerts and going to the Houston Symphony, and I get really wound up, and so I want to kind of preserve that feeling, and so an essay is a way for me to do that.
Well, I think we landed on the title of our show, dear Doni. Remember I said it before we started recording that maybe, something would come along that we would go, okay, that's got to be it. So do you feel pressure when you're writing about somebody like Motley Crue? And I know you've written about a lot of famous people, but we're just going to kind of stick with the theme here for our listeners that, because we're right here. Do you feel pressure that, maybe they'll read it, or do you just block all that out and say, I'm pure, I'm just going for it?
I want them to read it. I'm not a very negative writer. I've done some reviews, particularly of poets, and it's not that I, automatically write just, a gushing review. That's really not it. However, I think I've taught poetry long enough to recognize when something's really good. And so I try to give credit to artists for what they do accomplish. And I'm not nervous, but I do want to be conscientious. Like, I do want to make sure that when I'm writing about an artist that I understand what they're doing and that I've articulated that to other people so that they can enjoy that art too. And if I really hate something, I won't write about it, because I don't think that's I don't think of myself as a critic. I'm just a writer who observes things and then I put it into the best words I can. But I'm not. I want people I write about to read what I write. In fact, I did a review of Pat Green's concert in Galveston, and I just love that song, Wave on Wave, and a lot of people do and love him. And then he came to Houston again and performed at Cactus Records, for a very small audience. And I made sure he got the print edition of what I wrote, because I had interviewed him, and he had been very generous with his time with me. And I wanted him to know that I cared enough about that piece for him to have a print copy for his family. And so, it was wonderful to see him again. So I'm very glad that I've been able to meet such interesting people, and they really inspire me. And so a big part of my writing is to convey that.
Well, that's just beautiful, and I really appreciate it. Now, we can find a lot of your articles at Gray Matters. Can you give us some information on how to find those articles?
Yes. If you go to my Facebook page, which is Doni M. Wilson, I always have free links to Gray Matters. If you Google Gray Matters, I think you can find me pretty easily. But if you look at any of those articles and tweet it, you can get a free link to it. I mean, that just happens. And but if you Google Doni M. Wilson, I have earlier essays on my university blog at Houston Baptist University at Reflection and Choice, but most of those have been republished, most of them at the Houston Chronicle under Gray Matters. So, but anyone can contact me, and I'll say.
That's wonderful. And we just want to say Gray Matters is the Gray. It's not the Grey.
Yes, Gray Matters, and it's online at the Houston Chronicle, and then they have some things that run in print as well.
Oh, that's wonderful. Now, Donna, you're going to be a part of the Bridges Place Fall Festival, our 21 days of giving your best, and you're going to write something amazing. So our listeners can be looking for that. Do you want to give us a little hint or a little snapshot of into it, or is it too soon to ask for that?
Well, I've been thinking about it a lot, and I really appreciate you inviting me to do that. And I was thinking when you said, maybe to write about a Christmas letter, that, usually, or at least a lot of the Christmas letters I've received have been, about what's going on with the person who's writing the letter. But it might be fun to turn it around and send out a Christmas letter where you're asking questions and saying, I'd like to hear from you and hear what's going on with you.
I haven't heard from you in 25 years. What's going on? Yeah, I love it.
And maybe subvert the traditional Christmas letter and make it more about the recipient than the writer.
Oh, that's so fun. And I think everybody who's getting involved in the 21 days of giving your best with Bridges Place is kind of taking an old tradition and making it fresh and something personal. And I'm so excited to see what everyone's going to do. So join us at bridgesplace.org if you want to know more about what's going on with us. And I want to remind you, you're listening to Gems of Wisdom, and I'm Teresa Marone, your host. I'm here with Doni M. Wilson, who is a writer, of course, but she's also kind of a thinker, a philosopher, and a come-upper of wonderful ideas, like how to present Motley Crue in a whole different way. And I'd love to read that article, actually. Do you think that I could find it somewhere?
Oh, yeah. How about if I send it to you? No problem.
Well, do you think that it would be okay if I were to put that on the Bridget's Place Facebook page?
Sure. Oh, absolutely.
Oh, let's totally do that. So everybody look for Motley Crue and Donnie's wonderful article about them. They look amazing. I mean, these guys are such glam rockers, aren't they?
I know. They've made sure that the 80s never really go away.
They never really went away if you look at Motley Crue. My heavens. Well, Donnie, is there anything you'd like to share with our listeners before we end our interview today?
Well, some upcoming things I'll be doing. I'll be writing about the in-print reading series that's held here in Houston. I just did a piece on Jonathan Franzen and the Great American Novel, and I just did a piece before that on Mary Carr and her new book on writing a memoir. And so a lot of my pieces are on other authors because they inspire me a lot.
Well, I really like that you're a writer that's inspired by writers, and I look forward to seeing your first collection of essays coming out. I definitely want to be kept in the loop on that.
Oh, thank you. Well, I will certainly do that.
All right, lovely. And talking with Doni M. Wilson today, Houston Chronicle writer and doctor of English, a professor at the Baptist University here in Houston, Texas. And we're so glad that you've joined us on Gems of Wisdom today. I want to remind you that Bridget'sPlace.org features experts.
Find us at Bridget'sPlace.org. I'm Teresa Marone, your host. Join us next week on Gems of Wisdom every Wednesdays at 2 p.m. Central Standard Time.